Well, hello, people. Good morning, good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. So nice to have people back in this room for the final session of the Learning Society Forum. We launched the forum in September of 24 of this year with sorry, 25 of this year with the release of the second report of the Learning Society project. And the goal here is to encourage the nation to reimagine how it invests in human talent across ever lengthening lives in the face of dramatic technological change, and to sustain that conversation and bring as many voices to it as we can. I've been looking forward to this conversation because the work that you'll be hearing, I've been following for some time. These are two dear colleagues of mine at the University of California, San Diego, John Skrentny in the sociology department there, who many of you have heard in the Pathways Lab as well, and Mary Walshok, who's a longtime leader of the UC San Diego Extension Program. And they have been engaged in a multi-year research project investigating different ways in which legacy universities in the United States are supporting adult learners at different stages in their careers. I will be the interlocutor today. And John and Mary are going to share the honors of presenting the work. So with that, I will turn things over to John and then Mary. Welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mitchell. And it's exciting and wonderful to be a part of this group. As you know, our interests are very much aligned, synergies going off all over the place. And so we're excited to talk about this group. This presentation, I regret to inform you, is pretty word heavy, but it's idea laden as well. And so we're going to try to just dump our toys all over the floor and get the conversation rolling as quickly as possible. But we do have a lot to say, and I hope we can say clearly so that we're all on the same page. As you can see, our title is Who Will Train the Already Educated, which is meant to be provocative. Why do they need training if they're already educated? And the subtitle Career Sustenance in Higher Education highlights the fact that we're going to be talking about what universities can be doing in this space. So there we go. So here's the argument right up front. Universities, especially research universities, that's who we're focusing on, must embrace two education missions. They currently have embraced the career launching mission. That's their core. That's the residential part of every research university campus in America. But they also must embrace, we argue, a career sustenance role. That is skills updating for college grads. And they should do this building on the current best practices, which is what we've been focusing on. Okay, so I have to reduce this thing here. Okay. Basically, in our research, what we did was we went around the country. We did more than 75 interviews with, it's a little iffy because sometimes there were people grouped together, but a lot of interviews with leaders of universities, business, politics, research, nonprofits in targeted geographic areas meant to highlight economic diversity, geographic and economic diversity. That is, we looked at universities in the metro regions of Atlanta, Austin, Texas, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan, New York, Pittsburgh, Seattle, pretty much the whole country. And what we tried to do is identify the best practices that were already going on in career sustenance so that these practices could be emulated and scaled up. So let's see here. Okay, why do we target research universities? There's different reasons for this. One of them is that research universities have deep expertise and still, despite declining public confidence, which we'll talk about in a moment, still have a lot of public trust. This is why our host Mitchell Stevens and his colleagues in 2008 used the metaphor of the temple to describe the university. Think of these big columns in front of the libraries or in front of the major buildings. These are respected places, halls of knowledge that inspire public trust. even though that has been declining lately. These universities also have, research universities have strong infrastructure and convening power. That's why some scholars use the metaphors of the hub or the anchor to describe research universities. They have elaborate, deep, interlocking industry connections, mainly built through their research, the research innovations that they produce. Finally, and this is especially related to what we're calling career sustenance, the research universities can best anticipate skills gaps. They can best anticipate skills gaps because they're the ones developing the new technology that causes the skills gaps. Skills gaps. They know when it's coming. They can anticipate it. They can alert employers. They can work together with employers so that the employers can get the skills they need and workers can get the skills they need. All right, we in these different metro regions, we visited a lot of universities, obviously UC San Diego. These are the logos for professional and continuing education or extended studies who we're going to highlight, but that's not the only model here. As you can see, with University of Texas, it's within the School of Engineering, University of Michigan in the School of Engineering. These are some of the main ones that we talk to, but there's others included who are not included here. Columbia University, we talk to leaders there. University of Chicago, we talk to leaders there. Smaller universities like CUNY, DePaul University in Chicago. There's a lot of different folks we talk to, but these are the main ones who we're going to highlight today. All right, so we wanted to make three main cases for why universities need to embrace this role of career sustenance. And first is the idea of the moral case, and that is the idea that college grads are not set for life. Technology changes produce job changes, and this disruption is increasingly rapid. Layoffs have been common at least since the 1980s, even in economic good times, because shareholders reward firms that lay off workers. And booms and busts have been especially common in STEM fields for decades, without much response from higher education to deal with this problem that affects college grads. Policy shifts are more rapid. Just in the last few years, we saw the Biden administration work to produce the Chips and Science Act, semiconductors. Trump administration's pausing that. Obamacare created a demand for health IT. That's still going on, but that was a sudden ramp up in skills needs in the healthcare system, which didn't exist before. AI is impacting college educated the most, remaking jobs and tasks. And I have a slide on that in a second. And the other thing we want to say, every time we talk about this, people seem to have this kind of triage model where you imagine an ER room with people who are coming into the hospital with all kinds of problems, and they say, we got to get the people who are suffering the most, uh, we got to deal with them first. And and it is the case that people who don't even have a college grad need special help. We don't deny that. But we want to say that college grads also need help. 22% of the unemployed are in what Ofer Sharon, a sociologist, calls the stigma trap. That is, when you're unemployed for a long time, employers don't want to hire you precisely because you are unemployed. And college grads and experienced workers, even workers with advanced degrees, are equally or more likely to be in it when compared to non-college degree workers. So these folks are not set for life. This is just a quick slide to show you how AI seems to be impacting college grads more than folks who do not have college degrees. So we got a growing hidden crisis here, and we want to emphasize that these workers typically do not need another degree. They need fast, targeted, advanced, trusted training, which we argue is beyond the capacity of community colleges. Though community colleges do great work, they don't really have the capacity to reach college grads who need skills updating. And the corporate providers, which is a growing sector as well, also they can't capture these folks the way research universities can.
John, I'm going to
Yeah,
ask you a question.
yeah.
When you say corporate providers, do you mean like Amazon providing its own training, or are you talking about business education businesses?
I'm thinking more education
Ah,
businesses.
okay,
People
got
like
it. Okay,
General Assembly is a company that used to
right.
do
Okay,
boot camps, and now they've
right.
pivoted to like a
Okay,
business to business model. Yeah.
that's what you mean. Okay,
Yeah, Accenture has spent $1 billion buying up those companies or investing in
right,
them.
right,
They are
right,
betting on
right.
this. We're going to talk about that more in a second. So the political case we already mentioned, higher education really, it's in their interest to attract new stakeholders because public confidence needs to be rebuilt. It's been in decline since 2015, and it's been at an all-time low as long as the Gallup organization has been asking questions about that, as you can see here. So here's this business case. Much has been made about this demographic cliff, that is, that there's declining numbers of new 18-year-olds graduating from high school and who are ready for higher education. Currently, we graduate about 4 million a year. About 1.7 million of those are enrolled in higher ed, many of those in community colleges. Compare that to 56 million college grads now in the workforce.
Yeah.
And universities, they're letting the corporate providers, eat their lunch. Firms are spending about $100 billion overall on training, all education levels. And some of this is going to research universities and other colleges and universities now, but a lot of it is going to these corporate providers. And the money's on the table. It's just a question of whether or not universities want to be a part of this market. All right. And so you might say, well, who really needs skills here? This is some data from a previous project I did looking at STEM, people who work in STEM fields, whether they've taken some kind of skills related training in the past 12 months. And this is based on time since degree. And if you can see this on your screens, upwards to 25, 30 years after their most recent degree, more than 50% are getting skills related training in the last 12 months. The
Hmm.
market's there. This is STEM workers, but other folks are being impacted by AI as well and technology changes. So that's the business case. So we argue for this sort of new social contract for research universities, going beyond launching students into careers. We acknowledge that universities play important roles in citizenship and adulthood, transitions to adulthood, to include this sustaining of careers, this sustenance throughout the life course. We're emphasizing not replacing one with the other, but embracing two core educational missions: career launching and career sustenance. And let's get to the best practices. So what we argue is that there's a kind of structural model for how these are set up when they work the best. When they work the best, they're embedded, but they're autonomous, semi-autonomous at least, within universities. And there's multiple models of that, and Mary's going to talk about that more in a moment. They're agile. Agile, to be nimble, to be quick, you can't make degrees your bread and butter. The coin of the realm here is non-degree credentials. Certificates
Hmm.
is a common one. So then you don't have to do all this accreditation, all this difficult, slow-moving ramp up. You can change with employer skills demands. You can accommodate adult working learners in their busy lives. The best units we saw, they operate just like startups. They just like startups do this iterative customer discovery process to see what works and to see what customers want. These units also do this iterative curriculum development using multiple inputs from employers, from learners, from nonprofits to constantly change their curricula so that it serves the needs of both employers and learners. And one of the things they definitely do is they take risks. If something doesn't work, they take it down, they try something new. And Mary, you're going to take over here and talk about some stories. And Mary, you just tell me when you want me to change the slide on our three different
Okay,
operating models.
so let's go to the first operating model. We discovered three different operating models, all of which share the principles that John just articulated. And they're embedded inside the university, but they're semi-autonomous. The first is familiar to a lot of us on the West Coast. University of California, University of Washington have very large extension schools or divisions. UCLA, Berkeley, multiple campuses. And they're really focused on post-baccalaureate adults. That's 80 to 90% of their students. And they're awarding certificates often in emerging clusters of employment. So they're not just looking in the rearview window. They're
Hmm.
partners in the regional talent development ecosystem in arenas such as wireless communications, drug development, managing applied research settings, AI and manufacturing, and even at UC San Diego for 40 years now, an executive program for scientists and engineers where the minimum requirement is a master's degree and half of the students are PhDs. So they really do connect as a research university at the post-bac level, but they're a separate tub on their own bottom unit and one would argue not fully integrated into the academic planning and the articulation of mission of their campus. We discovered some wonderful centers within engineering schools. We're certain they exist in other schools as well.
Wait, are we on the next slide, Mary? Mary,
Oh,
are we on the
yes,
next slide?
please. Number two.
Did you want to say something about the executive training and for engineers and scientists?
Yes, I mentioned that for 40 years, UC San Diego, with the support of the then Chancellor Richard C. Atkinson, launched an executive program for scientists and engineers, right, that required a master's or a PhD to even be in the certificate program. And it's filled for 40 years.
Yeah, so they can move into management. Okay, are we ready for the next slide?
Yes, please go to the next one. Because what we also discovered, and this is thanks to John's great data mining skills, we discovered a number of centers on research university campuses, two of which really impressed us, both of which were embedded in schools of engineering, but again, honored the very principles John just articulated. Very nimble, very engaged with industry, in conversation with industry in terms of designing the curriculum, changing the curriculum rapidly, using professionals to teach as well as faculty to teach. And again, at the post-baccalaureate level, seminars, workshops, certificates, such as EV and what's happening in the whole arena of battery technology in the auto industry, and important new developments in Texas in the petroleum industry around clean energy, but also semiconductors. And these, again, were autonomous tubs on their own bottom, meaning they fund themselves and they have governance structures, but they're inside a traditional academic school like engineering. Let's go to the third slide, John. And then there's a third example. We did a deep dive with Georgia Tech, but there are some institutions like Arizona State University and others that are doing similar things. And this is where leadership at the chancellor or president's level sets a vision to be a lifelong learning resource, not just regionally, but nationally, but particularly regionally. And they have standalone units, a full college or a global university that stand shoulder to shoulder with graduate studies or with the School of Engineering or the School of Medicine, and a wide array of high growth, often online. All of these units, by the way, in all three examples, use a lot of online learning to reach adults who are working. And they've had tremendous growth in both at Georgia Tech, in both the part-time master's degrees as well as the certificate programs. And especially in these changing fields where STEM, technology is affecting everyday practice. But what John and I were taken with at Georgia Tech is the fact that Georgia Tech has also had a boom in its residential on-campus enrollments, simultaneous with the growth of this sort of College of Professional Studies. And so it speaks to the simultaneity of the need, right? We need to be launching undergraduates, but we also need to have this important kind of post-baccalaureate lifelong learning options. And so John's going to jump in now and talk about some of the quality and business issues that we also discovered.
Right. So thank you, Mary. That was great. And we can talk more about those details and examples in the Q&A if anyone would like. Okay, we identified on these best practices, what really impressed us was this public mission, this public spirit of these universities. And one of the areas where we saw this was a commitment to access. As Mary already mentioned when she talked about the online, these units will do whatever it takes to bring the education to the college grad adult learners, whether that means setting up classrooms downtown, whether that means bringing the education on site to the employer, which happens frequently. Sometimes Georgia Tech was one of the examples. They'll set up like a weekend workshop at a hotel in a conference room and do it there to make it convenient for the employer. There's a lot of online. These units were really the pioneers before MOOC mania. They were the ones who were really building a lot of this technology and figuring out best practices for online learning. And then a lot of them use hybrid. Georgia Tech is one of the ones that use a lot of hybrid, some online, a mixture of face-to-face and online education. But here's the other big part of access, and that is pricing. We did a lot of work trying to figure out and understand the strategies of pricing, and too few are not often enough. We found mission subsidized pricing. Mission subsidized pricing, that is when the education and training is offered below cost, has a long American tradition. The
Mm,
1914 Smith-Lever Act was all about adult education and bringing agricultural extension and different kinds of training to adults and putting in tax dollars to make it available, to make it cheap, to make it accessible. Now that is required. It's that triage model I was talking about, mostly for those without college degrees, which is great. We think that should go on. We think it should be expanded, but it means it's harder for working adults to access some of these kinds of things at below cost. And you could imagine if you're long-term unemployed, you're going to be very price sensitive. The best practices that we saw at many of the universities, this is much more common, is what we call cost recovery pricing. It's very common at the public research universities like the University of California system, University of Washington, University of Michigan, Texas, and Georgia Tech. With these folks, when they're designing their pricing strategy, they ask themselves, how low can we go? How low can we offer the price for this training, in order to make it possible to even be able to produce it? The exciting thing for a university from a financial standpoint is that with scale, they can actually make a profit. They can actually make some revenue. That's what Georgia Tech has been able to do with some of its online programming. And then too often we saw what we call margin seeking. This is especially common at the private elite universities. They seem to start with the question, how high can we go? How high?
mhm,
What's the highest price we could possibly offer this?
mhm,
And they're basically what they're doing is they're serving the institution rather than the public. They're generating revenue for the campus. So we saw some not so the opposite of best practices, let's say. We don't want to criticize any of our interviewees who share their time with us, but some universities, we don't really blame them. Their leadership put pressure on them to make money for the campus. They had to do that. And so it's really a problem with the leadership. Columbia and Northwestern were some examples of this, but generally the private elites were they did a lot of margin seeking. Here's an example. We did a
Oh,
little, almost every university is offering some kind of certificate or master's degree in data analytics, which has had a big ramp up in demand over the past few years. This is what a master's degree in data analytics will cost you at Georgia Tech, Harvard, and Northwestern. Same degree. I mean, do you tell me that the Harvard Extension or the Northwestern Professional Studies master's degree is three, four times better than the Georgia Tech one? I don't think so. But that's how much they're seeking margins on their pricing at these private elites compared to a more mission-oriented public like Georgia Tech. All right, and then here's our last slide about the best practices. We identified, it's kind of a Weberian ideal type. We didn't see this exact process, but we distilled it from what universities did to ensure quality in what they were offering. Four hurdles that curriculum developers had to pass in order to make sure that they were truly serving learners and employers. The first part of that is what we call demand validation. This is when you have an advisory board made up of employers, nonprofits, independent contractors, different experts in the field who can tell you what faculty members at the research university as well, who can tell you where the demand is. The best universities will buttress this with Lightcast, that is, it's a private labor market data service, or Bureau of Labor Statistics data to see where the job ads actually are going, to see where the employment is actually going. If you pass the demand validation hurdle, you're not going to be building a road to nowhere. And too many universities will offer these degrees because they think they can make money on them without doing a validation to see if employers actually want these folks, these degrees, or even non-degree credentials. The other quality test is what we call strategic fit. This is whether or not the training or education that's being offered fits with the university and its approach to education. We identified two different plays or two different ways of approaching this. One of them we call the signature play. This is when a university is developing education and training that builds on its own research expertise. The example of the one of the more salient or clear examples would be University of Michigan offering these special programs in electric vehicles and self-driving cars. University of Michigan, right next to Detroit, GM, Ford are there. They've got all kinds of expertise. And if you want that kind of training, that's a place where you would go. That's their signature play. But because research universities still have this kind of public confidence, they can be, even though it's declining, they can be what we call a trusted provider of training and education, even if it doesn't have much synergy with what the campus does. The University of Wisconsin created in the 1800s what they called the Wisconsin idea, which was the idea that they'll teach anything to anyone anywhere to bring expertise to the residents of the state of Wisconsin. Some of these universities will do that. They will see, well, okay, maybe we don't really have a real estate management program at our university, but there's a demand for that. People respect our brand. We're going to provide that training to folks. And there's a lot of universities that will do, basic things like Java and C+, computer coding kind of trading, even if they're not strong in that area. The other quality test, the other hurdle is what we call the advisor or instructor bench. That is the idea that you can't go forward with a program unless you know that you can get a strong advisory board made up again of employers and nonprofits and other experts. You can't go forward unless you know that you can get a strong bench of instructors. These instructors can be made up of faculty, regular ladder rank faculty at the university. Often, even more commonly, they are made up of practitioners in the community. And this is an area where career sustenance is different from career launching. For if you're trying to build careers, trying to build skills and knowledge to sustain your career, in many cases, you prefer a practitioner in the field over an ivory tower PhD intellectual to teach you these skills. You want someone who's actually doing this stuff now to give you that kind of training. And universities, because of their power as hubs and anchors, we were surprised had such little difficulty attracting folks who want to teach for the university. They can get practitioners to teach these cutting edge skills. They can get faculty members at some universities, not every university, to move into this area of teaching adults as well as doing career launching. And last, brand integrity. Universities, if they're doing this career sustenance kind of work, they need to serve the public. They need to think about what they're doing and how it might impact their brand, the esteem of the university in the community or in the nation. They need to avoid bad PR. They need to avoid, and I have to say this, they need to avoid lawsuits. So you may have seen some of these headlines. Caltech agreed to settle a lawsuit where they had a contract with an online program manager. It's a OPM, they're called in the business, where they outsource their training to a private company. They put their university brand name on it, but the instructors, all of the content is produced by some private actor. Students would sign up for these courses and think that they're getting a Caltech education, and it turns out they're getting it from a different organization who they've never heard of. In this case, it was a firm called Simply Learn. This isn't just done at Caltech. It's not just done at privates. It's done at publics as well. And if you're worried about your brand integrity, you need to roll back these kinds of moves. And then in terms of pricing, the Wall Street Journal did a lot of, I think, quality muckraking journalism, highlighting the way margin-seeking pricing was destroying lives. They were luring students to get master's degrees into fields where there was very little employer demand, and these early career adults were hobbled for life, as the headline said, that they had these gigantic debts with no employment prospects related to the degree that they paid all that money for. So these are the things that must be avoided. And that's where we're going to stop here. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear about the opportunities in your region or your institution. We'd love to hear more from you in any way.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. If you could unshare your screen, that'd be great. Thanks. Um, Beautifully done. I've heard this story before, but I'm always happy to hear it again. Um, Stephen, who I'm going to ask you to maybe can you take Marie, Michelle, and yourself off of the screen, and because I'm just so egomaniacal, I need to see a larger photograph of myself. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I'll start with it. So one of the things that I've been saying to academic leaders when I have the occasion to do that, meaning university leaders, is I want to run it by you and see what you think, and then we'll go to some lovely comments and questions from the assembled. What I say is the United States is undergoing a major change in its human capital system. So the way in which we train people is changing, right? Like we organized investment in adults primarily around access, persistence, and completion of four-year college degrees, and we pushed that and pushed that and pushed that and pushed that, especially since deindustrialization in the late 1980s. In fact, there were rooms you couldn't enter if you had the temerity to say that not everyone should get a four-year college degree in this country. That strategy has come to a close. And there's tons of activity in the sector, as everyone in this call I know realizes, right? And so what I say to university leaders is like, you can either adapt or you can become just less incrementally less relevant. Is that too strong a thing to say on your view, John and Mary, to the leaders of the Wisconsins and San Diegos and Stanfords of the world?
So the only thing I would add, Mitchell, that John and I, and remember, my other books have been around regional innovation systems. And John really has done a lot of work on workforce trends, immigration, and particularly STEM education. And the only thing I would add to what you are saying is there's a new huge cohort that needs advanced education. And that's these industries that are being impacted by technology, which is being developed in research universities, not community colleges. And so the case we're trying to make is in many medicine related, in drug development, even in retail and marketing and management and of course data analytics and advanced, that knowledge base changes with such rapidity that universities are being called upon to play a new role. So in the past, it was more compensatory. So your point about access, we think access is important, but which means affordability for working adults with families and limited time. But I think it's a new need, it's a new opportunity. Now, John may say it a little differently.
Well, I get an image in my head, and maybe this wasn't your intention, Mitchell, but I get an image in my head of this idea that education used to have these sort of marker endpoints.
Yeah.
And that world ended a long time ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have a colleague here, Gary Crowd, who works in education sort of stuff, and he talked about the idea of graduate and gone is an anachronistic idea. Graduate and gone is not going to work anymore. And so this notion of these kind of landmark, or not landmark, but these endpoints in your education, it needs to be replaced with a sort of continual process of constant skill updating. And that's part of the reason we love what you guys are doing with the Learning Society. I mean, we have absolute absolute convergence with your interest there. And we started this project before you guys did this. And I'm glad that it took us so long to do it, because now we can be a part of your effort. But I really think that this stuff is that your approach is really important. And yeah, I'll leave it there. I had another thought, but I lost it. Let's go to the next question.
There's our colleague in the sociology department at Johns Hopkins, Amy Binder, has a lovely comment. Wonderful work on how universities should be cultures of sustenance, not just launch. In my current research project studying the career pathways of mid-career professionals from elite schools, we're finding that some of those who avoided career funneling into finance, consulting, and big tech now feel career stymied because they did social impact careers, but the she's talking about the ladders aren't clear in those fields, right? These mid-career professionals may need what you're talking about in the middle of their careers to improve their mission-driven work. Do you have suggestions or thoughts about that?
Well, maybe I could jump in, John.
Yeah.
And hi, Amy. A number of university extension programs. I'm not certain about sociology departments or schools of social work or public health, have launched certificates that are directly relevant to managing the not-for-profit enterprise. All right. Fundraising certificates. And also providing, and this is a little bit in our book, a lot of career guidance, job fairs where people come to learn about new practices and new opportunities. So I think what's important about what we've discovered is there are certain principles of practice. There are platforms you can create. And I suspect the humanities and social sciences have been slower to adopt these than have schools of engineering, business, law, medicine. And what we're seeing, and John, I'm going to pivot to you because the story, if you would tell the story why you came to talk to me about doing this research, what John discovered in his work is that very large percentages, something like 30% of people working in STEM were history, sociology, and literature degreed students.
Right.
And he said, how are they getting qualified? And I said, oh, we have about 50,000 of them in our extension programs who are getting certificates. So we have to rethink, I think, when we deliver what kind of learning. Because what we're also doing in this book is we're very strong advocates of a strong liberal arts foundation as the launch pad. We love the liberal arts because it teaches people how to learn and how to integrate new knowledge and how to deal with complexity. And that's what you need if you're going to be trained multiple times across a lifespan, retrained.
Yeah, that's great. Let me just add one point on that. Yeah, the education scholar Jonathan Zimmerman has a great quote that we use in the book where he says, liberal arts is career preparation training. You just don't know what the career is.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is almost no one knows what careers are going to be available in 10 years. We do not know what they are going to be. And that's why we're not big fans of the movement to turn higher education into vocational schools, into preparation for one particular job. My last book showed that 2/3 of STEM grads don't work in STEM jobs. And those are supposedly fields where there's a massive shortage, hair on fire kind of crisis shortage, and people are leaving those fields and doing other things. So Mary and I are completely on board on this idea that the bachelor's should be a place where you get these foundational skills that allow you to pivot multiple times throughout your life. And the other thing I wanted to add is that, and we didn't include this in the best practices here, but Mary knows a lot about this, is that some of the best career sustenance units, one of the things they do is they educate learners on where the demand is. So if
Yeah, exactly.
you're in a situation like Amy was talking about, where you feel stuck, you need to know where to go. Some of these schools, they'll have websites. Well, they'll have a blog, and they'll reveal some of this Lightcast or BLS data that says, here's where you need to go. Here's where it's in demand. Here's where, we've done the quality test. We know that these are fields where there is demand. And so it offers some guidance, because otherwise, if you're out there, you're stuck, your university said goodbye to you, your university just thinks of you as a potential donor rather than a partner, you're going to have some trouble finding where to go. So there is a role for that as well.
Andrea in QA in the chat has a point. How do you see how do you all see AI impacting this notion about where you're going to find advisors and instructor talent, right? On the perhaps how does AI fit into the provision side of this?
Well, if I can jump in, and what we also discovered at the research universities we visited is significant faculty input. John made in his opening remarks the point that the new technologies that are transforming not just work life, but civic life and family life, 90% of them are coming out of research universities. So I'm not being negative about community colleges, but community college faculty are not in the milieu which knows where technology is going, because they don't support or reward research, and they should not. So it's not a critique. That's why I keep saying this is a new phenomenon. So the programming professionals in all the units we talk to, many of them have traditional academic degrees. They're not degrees in adult education. And they're in the world of conversation in the fields where they're programming. So the dean at UC San Diego is a chemist who with a PhD who also has an MBA, right? So he can walk between multiple worlds. And so a lot of the intelligence is coming from the faculty, and a lot of the intelligence is coming from early adopters, because these centers have a culture of interacting regularly with industry.
Well, and in fact, Tim Cornelius has a really nice prescient point in the QA. He writes, at the community college where I worked, we had a career development program to train people how to use the Walmart Retail Link database. We often had PhDs, attorneys, and people with varied degrees in this 5-course program. The program served the Walmart vendor community as well as Walmart, right? I mean, I think a lot of, and we just have to admit, there's a lot of snobbery here that, in which, of course, the elites, can only teach certain kinds of people in certain kinds of ways and certain kinds of formats. I think that, I mean, you guys talk about this in your work, right? And I think it sort of shows up also in the sort of, the often exorbitant prices that the elites are charging, right? Which is like, I think we're getting to a point where that's really getting in the way of the political and even business viability of these places. Bernard,
Mitchell, can I just
make
one quick point on that? I heard you asking a little bit in this question about AI's, not just its impact in changing jobs, but maybe this is me anticipating AI's role in educating mid-career learners. And I definitely think, in our book, in our chapter 2, we lay out the landscape of where people can get this training, and we have a whole section on people train themselves. I mean, if you really educate, you can go online. There's all kinds of sources where you can learn things, and AI, I think, is going to get better and better at this. And but one of the things we learned from the more successful units is that they can provide context. If you get the training from a trusted provider like a research university, you're getting, well, the problem is when you train yourself, you don't know what you're missing. And if you
Mhm.
get it from a trusted provider, they can provide you that context, but they can also provide you something else. We heard again and again how adult college grads getting this training were able to build their networks through the training
Yes,
and get
exactly.
jobs. Sometimes the practitioner instructors would say, "Hey, these people are good. I can use them at my own company." Sometimes folks would meet each other through these different kinds of organization. Georgia Tech told us, Nelson Baker, the dean there, told us that they they've been laggards. I mean, they've been absolute at the vanguard of online education, but in a way, they're kind of holdovers with a lot of in-person education because they love getting people together where they can have. I mean,
Hmm.
employers talk about this, but where you can meet each other, you can exchange some ideas. University of Michigan, they told us how they do this in their human factors
Hmm.
engineering program as well. Get people in there, meet each other. Job networking can happen through these programs as well, and that's not going to happen if you're doing self-learning at home.
But
Bernardo,
it also,
go ahead.
oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Mitch. It also bespeaks why would you go to a research university? Because there's a lot of peer to peer. You know, if you go to a program at Stanford or at UT Austin, you are likely to meet other college graduates who learn at the pace you learned and have experiences that are relevant and are connected to opportunities. And I
Mhm.
think it's a so the multi-tiered or the multi system of a career training is a value. And I think research universities have been slow to see their unique niche in
Mhm.
this overall
Mhm.
ecosystem of
I mean,
training.
take a look at Bernardo McKenna's comments and then also Denise's in the Q&A, because I think there's in the chat. I mean, I think there's some things that are being tangled up here in a useful way, which is some of this, yeah, different institutions have different capacities, right? Research
Right.
universities, kind of, but there's also a ton of snobbery in here, right? Which is, and I put that mostly on the shoulders of the Research One universities, which is right. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, it's like they look at the community college system in California, right? It's a many splendored thing. There are lots of community colleges who are doing, in many ways, much of what you're talking about, right? But what I find gets in the way is these presumptions about which institutions are supposed to serve which people at which stages in the life course,
That's a
right?
very good
Mhm.
point.
Um,
Mhm.
and so, I mean, I think that's kind of, that gets in the way, um, and in a way that I don't think it did in the same way even 75 years ago, when research universities were much small. Their hegemony over the sector was just not as strong, right? I mean, there were lots of different ways to be an excellent institution, I would suggest, in the middle of the 20th century. Now we've entered a world in which, like, virtually all the prestige resides in Research One universities, and kind of everything else is regarded as somehow, they're useful, but they're not prestige driving.
But
Um,
yet, the land grant university movement was an acknowledgement by the federal government as well as by states that you needed to get researchers closer to practitioners.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly.
And so
That's
that's all
that's right.
John and I are saying, that researchers have a role to play in
Right.
informing practitioners and curriculum that relates to practitioners. And that's the unique niche of
Hmm.
the research universities. So at places like Washington and UC San Diego, drug development, clinical trials management
Hmm.
programs were launched fully 10 years before they appeared in the community colleges, when the curriculum was developed and the market was solidly.
Right. Right. No, I mean, your message is clear. It's just that the status system of higher education is also
Yeah,
sort of
we
part
agree.
of the mix here. Yeah.
And we think there's a public private status problem
Oh,
too.
go
Yeah,
ahead,
can
John.
I say something on this? I'm going to tell a couple just really quick stories about the role for research universities that is separate from some of these other providers. Um, Both from UC San Diego. UC San Diego is the origin of Qualcomm, a company that makes chips and cell phone technology. And Mary was there for the building of that, where the technology developed from the university, Irwin Jacobs, and they worked with UCSD Extension to
Extension, yeah.
yeah, to scale up their workforce in a new technology that wasn't being taught anywhere because it was new.
Mhm.
And that's something you're not going to be able to get anywhere. And now we have a Fortune 500 company here that wouldn't have happened without this ability to scale up the training. Now,
Mhm.
there's other times though where the university, I'm going to tell you a story. When we talked to these, when we did these interviews, we said, what was your green light? What was your red light in going forward with the program? And there's another example of technology that developed at UC San Diego related to algae. Algae can be used for biofuels and powering jet planes. It can also be used to develop better, safer plastics. And the UCSD scientist who developed this technology he was patenting what he could do. He was able to get a grant that helped UC San Diego kind of develop a training curriculum. But then the venture capital investor dollars did not did not get to where they needed to be to scale this up at the right time. So the red light came on, demand validation, the quality test hurdle was not passed. But had that gone forward, there's the only one place in the world that could have developed this kind of training, and that's the research university. We saw that happening at Michigan, Texas. We've got so many great stories of. I'm not a big fan of fossil fuels, but we still use a lot of fossil fuels. And the University of Texas does amazing things in petroleum engineering. When fracking developed, they worked with Penn State and the Colorado School of Mines to develop a
Mhm.
training program for the government regulators to make sure that fracking was done safely. The firm said, hey, we can't do this training because no one's going to trust our training because we make money off of this. They went to the universities and they said, you guys build a training program so the regulators know how to regulate us. And you're an
Mhm.
independent, trusted provider. And they've created this consortium called Top Energy, and they made fracking more safe than it would have been otherwise. And educating educators, um,
Mhm.
educating regulators, not just in the US, but other countries as well.
Mhm.
So that's the niche, Mitch, we're
Yeah.
addressing in this book.
No, and as you should, right? But it's also the case to sort of like to sort of think about, what happened that moved us so far away from the Wisconsin idea, even
Oh,
at the University of Wisconsin,
Mm.
absolutely.
right? Like
Absolutely.
how have the last 30 years played out? Like, I mean, I just today I put in the chat, the New York Times ran this program. Um, they're nothing specifically against Tulane and the University of Chicago because this happens everywhere, but this is basically about the $1 million salaries that admissions officers make at schools
Right,
that succeed in getting more full payers to enroll
right.
at elites that have the sad problem of being in the bottom half of the top tier.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's precisely the kind of activity, right? That elite schools are being, I think, appropriately pilloried for, and yet there it is, right?
Right.
Because
Can I
It's
go
Can I
ahead.
add I want to add a point to that because I've been thinking about this during the whole presentation. Not just elites, but major flagship public universities
Yes, yes.
use adult education to generate revenue to feed into residential career launching education
Hmm.
in building these lifestyle communities on campuses, not just all these, high-powered quantitative efforts to kind of game the admission system in various ways, but also just the expensive, the climbing gyms, the lazy rivers, this stuff that they build on campuses to attract undergraduates with all these luxury kinds of items. Um, and they're getting adults to pay for that at some of these places. They're
Hmm.
they're
for
they're
their own graduates.
yeah, they're saying we're gonna soak the adult learner. They have a
Hmm.
job, maybe they don't. And hey, you know what? They've got a mortgage to pay. They might have kids at
Hmm.
home, and we're gonna charge them margin-seeking pricing so that we could do more for the
Hmm.
undergrads so that their lives are more cushy and that they have a better gym. That's something. The residential campus is this monster that needs to be fed, and
Mhm.
we would argue against the practice, which is too common, of using adult
Mhm.
learners to feed that beast.
Mhm. Well, and so this is, I mean, and you know, these are matters for which there, you know, are not easy answers, right? Because these institutions have become hydra-headed, you know,
Yes.
many
Hmm.
splendored things. I
Hmm.
think, you know, I know from whence I sit, right, at Stanford University, for example. Um, you know, I think one of the challenges for people who have the privilege of working in places like the ones that I work at is, you know, how to very forcefully encourage these institutions um, to adapt, right, to the context that they're in. And then, you know, at what point does one decide that, you know, will they be able to adapt, right? I think that's the open question. I think the great variety of the post-secondary sector means that some of them will adapt and flourish, right? But it is a moment I do think where there's a good bit of agency capacity
Yeah.
in the leadership ranks of these institutions to make some hard choices about, you know, which eggs they're going to be, you know, nesting for the next 2 to 10 years. Go ahead.
And
Last
Mitchell,
words from both of you guys.
I was just going to say there's a fabulous example. I did a book, oh, what, 40 years ago, 25 years ago, called Knowledge Without Boundaries. And I did
Mm-hmm.
an in-depth study of NYU during the leadership of John Bradamus, a
Oh
former
yeah. Yeah.
senator from Indiana
Yeah.
University.
Yeah.
And the first thing he did was to create a tagline for NYU, a private university in the public service.
Mhm.
That speaks volumes about what John and I are saying. I don't think this is just a public problem. I think it's a public private problem. And we need to design business models, right,
Right.
that can assure access, but also continue to support the research enterprise, which feeds the economy in such
Mhm.
important ways. And we don't have any existing models yet for how to do that. And that's partly why we're so delighted to be associated with you, because this isn't just a values issue, it's an
Right.
operational
It's
and
an
business
operational issue. Yeah.
model
Issue.
problem. And we need to struggle on what works and what doesn't together.
John, one word.
The word would be universities need to do something. People are not happy with universities, and and we argue that they need to adapt to the 21st century. Actually, the late 20th century.
The late 20th century. Yeah.
Lot these dynamics were all in place, and it's the time is now. The time is now to
We, and
change
the
the
good
op.
part is the sheer variety of the sector means that there are some great
Oh,
stories out
great
there, and
Mhm.
your
stories.
work is revealing them. So thanks to you both. I'm going to ask you to stay on the call because I have a
Okay.
crazy idea for you.
All right.
But we're going to let others go. And we will have another series of forums in winter 26. So stay tuned. More to follow. Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you.
everybody for
Yep.
coming. And Amy, if you're still there, hello to Amy Binder, my old friend.
Hello, Amy.
Uh,
We miss you.
And Bernardo, we miss you as well.
and Bernardo as well. San Diego casts a long shadow. All right. Bye.